Hey guys, it's Reba. Happy New Year and a happy 2025. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite books from 2024 and then also just tell you about a couple of rereads that I loved for the second time. So those will count as honorable mentions. Last year I did a wrapped video of books, but I also included music and podcasts and movies and TV shows. I still want to talk about those other categories, but I'm going to do that in a separate video this year. So this video is going to be books only, but if you're interested in hearing about some of my other favorite media from last year, just stay tuned for another video coming out in a couple of days. With that being said, let's talk about my favorite books from 2024. My goal this year was to read 52 books, but I was only able to read 42, which is all right. Like, this year brought so many unexpected things, so I'm not surprised that I didn't read as much as I had intended to. I read mostly fiction, which is typical for me, and mostly in print. However, I did read a lot, or I did listen to a lot of audiobooks this year. First, I'm going to talk about my honorable mention books, which, like I said before, are just going to be rereads. So I read two. I think these are both the only rereads I read. But they were books I loved in the past, and I loved them again this year, reading them for the second time, or this past year. But the first book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I am here for all of its drama and aesthetics, and I don't know, maybe it's a little bit indulgent, but I'm here for it. This is your quintessential dark academia. It's set at an elite university. There's an eccentric professor, there's a murder, and then at the center of it all is this group of students with an unhealthy appetite for the classics. So I found this incredibly compulsive the first time I read it. And then this second time I focused I paid attention to how Donna Tartt does her scene setting and her atmosphere. I found really compelling. The plot is fun, and it's just for how big of a book it is, I feel like I end up racing through it pretty quickly because it is a pretty, somehow a very fast-paced read because of the plot. And then the second book that I reread this year and loved again was Beloved by Toni Morrison. This was my introduction to Toni Morrison. So this is the first book I read of hers. And it was several years ago. And at the time, it really blew my mind and changed my expectations for literature. This is, I imagine, most people's experience when they pick up any Toni Morrison as their first. But Beloved happened to be mine. And I can say, even though I've read her other books, this one still stands as my favorite, especially after the second read. I think why Beloved works so well for me is probably the gothic element. I also like reading about sisters, so the fact that there's this sister relationship, there's also a mother-daughter relationship, just a lot of the thematics and the atmosphere of this storytelling in Beloved, I think really works for me. It's about Setha, a woman who flees and escapes slavery, but her life is still haunted by its violent effects. You guys already know Toni Morrison is great, but just another reminder that this one's my favorite. Okay, now I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite books of 2024 and just go through them in chronological order of which I read them. I have some notes here. I'm just going to go over briefly what the book was about, and then I'll read my review that I wrote shortly after reading the book. So let's just get started. The first book is The Story of the Lost Child by Elena Ferrante. It is translated by Anne Goldstein. This is the first book in the Neapolitan Quartet, which is a series of 4 books that's a Bildungsroman of these 2 young girls from Naples, Italy, following them from childhood to adulthood. It's centered on their friendship and also their romantic relationships and their self-discovery. It's a well-loved series. It's a favorite in this little corner of BookTube, and so I know you've probably heard of it. If you enjoy literary fiction or women's fiction and women's stories, if you like stories of female friendship, if you love getting your heart broken and being frustrated or angry while reading, you'll like the series. For me, every book got better and better. I read the first one several years ago and thought it was just fine. And then I read the second one and was just completely hooked on this series. So I read the second and third books in 2023 and then finished out this final book at the beginning of 2024. This final book sees the 2 friends returning back to their neighborhood, but as adult women and completely changed by the different events in their lives. I do think that the 3rd and 4th books may be my favorite from this initial read through, so that makes this 4th book a definite favorite for 2024. Now I'll just read the review that I wrote after reading it. I said, "Perfect closure to this epic story. I was captivated seeing the friends back in the neighborhood together as adults, while the events that took place left me absolutely devastated. Wow, just wow." The second book on my list is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. It's about a young American expat in Paris and his romantic and sexual relationships. The story explores love and death under very violent circumstances. Baldwin's prose is just beautiful, and his characters are so complex and rich, and they just have the power to break your heart. In my review, I said, "Absolutely incredible. I couldn't possibly write a review to do this book justice. I was devastated to my core. Every conversation, every monologue left me breathless. Pain, shame, and desire explored in the rawest form." The next book on this list is Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. It was just the book I needed. It showed up just at the right time for me. Was this fun romp after a long string of sad and serious books. The book is about an unlikely collision between an anarchist gardening collective and an American billionaire over this abandoned piece of land. I think the less you know about the plot, the better, so I'm just going to read my review for you and leave you with that. Most fun read for me so far this year. Compulsive thriller served as a brilliant satire. Catton skillfully distilled varying perspectives into each of her characters while exploring climate politics and turned out an exciting plot that had me racing to the end. This is clearly the work of a talented literary writer who values reading for enjoyment. Next on my list is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters. This is another book with high literary merit, but also a really enjoyable, fun read, similar to Birnam Wood. This is about an orphan girl named Sue that's being raised in this household of thieves that are called fingersmiths. And the outskirts of Victorian London. She agrees to play a role in conning this like sheltered woman out of her inheritance. And but once she gets involved, like her feelings get in the way, and the job and everything is not all as it seems. Go into this knowing little of the plot and you'll have a great time. So I'm just going to read my review and leave you with that. Twisty, gothic, Dickensian. I couldn't put down this Russian doll of a novel. An inheritance con meets sapphic romance that kept me in suspense practically the whole time. A very, very fun read. Sarah Waters is a masterful writer. Next favorite is The Flamethrowers by Rachel Kushner. And this book came to me again with really good timing. I picked it up when I was moving across the country from California to New York, and it centers on a main character who's moving from the Western United States to New York in pursuit of her art career. Obviously, that really resonated with me. I saw a lot of parallels between myself growing up primarily in the Western states and then moving to New York, and I felt like she got all of these kind of landscapes of like the desert and kind of these like expansive landscapes that I was used to and I'd seen, like the Bonneville Salt Flats and like what Nevada feels like. All of those kind of regions really came alive for me and resonated in a way that like was very specific to me. And and then just the characters speaking about like the loneliness and kind of the strangeness of New York also resonated with me like when I first arrived. Like I said, Kushner was really great at showing the contrast between the vastness of the Western states, the spaces that the main character Reno was inhabiting, and then the contrast between the energy of New York, especially the art scene in the 70s. The story primarily takes place in New York City in 1975, but there's also a intersection with this Italian family and their kind of motorcycle manufacturing empire. The main character, Reno, gets involved with the son of this family, and at some point in the book, he takes her to Italy with him, and the book feels at once very real and very alive, but there's also like such a cinematic quality to it. So I thought this was fantastic. I'm excited to read more by Rachel Kushner, and now I'll just read my review. Brilliant. Kushner skillfully weaved historical realism with fiction in this novel set in the 1970s. The main character acts as an observer and drifts between the different worlds, the American West, the New York art scene, then to Italy, where she spends time with both the aristocracy and leftist militant groups. Cinematic scenes and stories told by other characters make up this rich novel about motorcycles, art, the passage of time, and passion. Next book is Malina by Ingeborg Bachmann, translated by Philip Boehm. And actually, the introduction was written by Rachel Kushner, so this was a delightful coincidence that I had recently read Kushner. Malina had been on my radar for some time now, but the final push, what got me to finally pick it up last year, was Biblio Sophie's book club that she runs on Substack. And it was great reading this alongside of her notes. I feel like this book there's just so much in it that it really lends itself to like a conversation. And so I loved having a little bit of that through Sophie's Substack. Sophie also included a lot of notes about there's kind of some music theory and terminology in this book that her knowledge of that was really helpful to have as I was reading it. The book is about an unnamed narrator who's a woman and her relationship with two different men. One is Malina, and he lives with her and starts out kind of in the background, but imposes more into the book and into her life as the story goes on. The other man is her love obsession, her romantic obsession. As the book goes on, the presence of both of these men in her life become more and more suffocating, and she starts to lose her grip on reality, and into this kind of spiraling, nightmarish stream of consciousness. I will say that was a very simplified description of what this is about, as it's a very psychological book, and the boundaries of the characters aren't so easily defined. I'm sure I will be reading this again, as I feel like it's one of those books that every time you read it, the more gets revealed to you, and the more you see and understand. So for now, I will read my review. Absolutely brilliant. Bachmann's mastery of language is staggering. There is so much in this genius novel that will keep me returning because I know I didn't take in everything my first go. What I did manage to take in was incredible. The madness of the feminine mind, passionate obsession, surfacing demons, and so much anxiety around time, men, and correspondence. I'm just a girl. Okay, we're doing some resetting because Helen needed some lunch, and then she wanted to come hang out with us. So we're reset, but we're here. Shall we continue? The next book on my list was Beautiful World, Where Are You? By Sally Rooney. And this was a surprisingly refreshing read. I read it with my friend Katie. We did a buddy read together, and we just had a lot of fun talking about the book and texting about it as we were reading. It's about 4 young adults, Eileen, Alice, Felix, and Simon. And Alice and Eileen are best friends, and they keep in touch through email during the book. They talk about life updates, they talk about sex and dating, and what they think makes the world beautiful. Alice meets Felix when she moves to a more remote area of Ireland, and then Eileen reconnects with Simon romantically, but he's someone she's known since she was young. The relaxed, not a lot happens, but just enough happens kind of book. She just touched on some things that I think about and worry about in a comforting way. So it was just what I needed this past year, and I loved it. Okay, so my review was, she's so real for that. I loved this smart and stylish novel about friends, life, and love. More optimistic than I had imagined Rooney would be. I enjoyed the exploration of themes through the characters' individual experiences, and I could keep reading emails from Alice and Eileen forever. All right, the next favorite is Let Me Tell You, and this is a collection of writing by Shirley Jackson. One thing about me is I love Shirley Jackson. She's probably my favorite writer. Probably talk about her the most on this channel. But this collection is really for fans of Shirley Jackson. For fans of Shirley Jackson. Two of her children ended up putting this together after going through her archive. And it is a good representation of her range. It has stories that were unpublished, or there's even a story in here that was unfinished, but they found it in the archive and wanted to include it. And also has essays that she wrote. She wrote a lot of nonfiction type essays about her family and kids and homemaking, and then other writings, which include lectures on the craft of writing. And also I found very cute, let's see if I can find one. They also found like little drawings, let's see if I can, little like drawings that she used to do for her kids, like little funny sketches. Some of them have little like punchlines, like a little comic. Yeah, that was very cute. It's like a fun collection. Again, like I said, very much for a Shirley Jackson fan. I am not a completionist yet. I've been savoring her work, but I think I only have one novel left, and then I haven't read any of her nonfiction besides what's in here. I know she has a couple of memoirs, and then other short story collections. If you've read her fiction, you'll know she writes a lot of psychological and gothic horror, kind of in that realm. But I would say that her nonfiction feels like more humorous and lighter, but in both cases, her wit and her personality come through similarly, and some of the, like a lot of the themes are similar. Like you can tell she has this unique way of seeing the mid-century American suburban family and the community, and how there's like kind of an underlying darkness and like claustrophobic feeling to that type of society. I think that a lot of people may have a misconception about her, that she was just kind of like a dark, gloomy hermit. But I feel like reading like her whole kind of range at once, you can see that she's so much more complex. Like she dealt with agoraphobia and anxiety, and she was a woman, in the 50s trying to make a career as a writer. And yet she also, you can tell when she writes about her kids and her family that she like loved being a mother, and she found like everyday magic throughout her life. So there's this like awareness of the darkness, and also this like lightness and brevity to her writing. I think I just have this theory that maybe it was easier for her to mask some of like the anxieties and the darkness she felt when she was writing more nonfiction or more personally. But she was able to dig into it more with her fiction writing. That's my theory. I don't know, because I feel like there's quite a contrast in the lightness and darkness between the two. And I don't know. I'm just a fan. I'm just saying what I perceived. But yeah, I mean, this was just such a delicious read for me. I loved it. And I especially loved like the back section is like all of her writing on like her lectures on writing and how she writes, and her philosophies on writing. And I thought that was just fantastic to have, and to read that, having read so many of her novels, was so fun. But let me just read my review and we'll move on. A delightful collection of Jackson's range. This was my first time reading her essays and other nonfiction, so although I've engaged with her dark humor before, I experienced a whole new level of wit and charm. Such a fun way to engage with one of my favorite authors. The last two books on my list I don't have physical copies of. I borrowed them from the library. But the next favorite was Strega by Johanne Lykke Holm. and this was translated by Saskia Vogel. This one's interesting because originally I felt that it was more of a 4-star read than like a 5-star, but I have not been able to stop thinking about it. Scenes and imagery from the book like come to mind all the time. I'm actually quite inspired by it the more I've like let it marinate and settle inside of me. It was such a good book, and I just can't stop thinking about it. So that's how I know it's a favorite. It's about a young woman who is just on the cusp of adulthood, and she goes to work at this Alpine hotel with a bunch of other young girls, young women just like her. The duties and the responsibilities that the girls have to prepare the hotel for guests seem very strange, and for a long time no guests show up. Eventually guests do show up, and there's like a big celebratory party during which one of the girls goes missing. It's very unsettling. It's a very atmospheric read, and I don't know, it just really did something to me. Like, I feel like very like spellbound by it. I have Katie James to thank for putting it on my radar, so thank you, Katie. I'm so glad I read this book. In my review, I said, atmospheric and chilling, a book that encapsulates that feeling of learning dark secrets, the ones girls tell each other as desperate warnings, filled with symbolic imagery that lingers in my mind. All right, final book. This is my last favorite from my favorite reads of 2024. The book is Poems from the Book of Hours by Rainer Maria Rilke, and it's translated by Babette, Deutsch. I ventured into more poetry this year, and this was my favorite collection of all the ones I read. Nobody's surprised because it's Rilke, and everyone loves him. But this was my first Rilke, so I can now confirm that he's wonderful, and I loved this collection. There's a very spiritual and reverent tone to the poems. They read as prayers and meditations, but the God that he is writing about isn't like the Christian idea of God. Rilke's God is like found through the sensitivity of art and artists and that like part that like humanity itself, but particularly how it's expressed through artists. Just gorgeous imagery and lyricism. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I wrote a short and sweet review, but I just said, I adored this collection of poetry, transcendent, tender, and holy. Those are my top 10 favorite reads of 2024, plus some rereads. I had a great reading year. I am very excited and ambitious about my reading for 2025. I think I will try to get 52 books read this year. See if I can do it. Hopefully my year is very, very boring and I have all the time in the world to read. Let me know in the comments if you also have read any of these books, or if you share any favorites with me. Look out for my next video, which will include all my other favorites. If you want to see what my favorite movies and music artists were, I'll show you my Spotify Wrapped. Happy reading, everybody, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.